Good morning, Pastor Matthew, Hollywood United Methodist Church, joining you again for our journey along the Gospel of Luke, one chapter a day, leading us through the month of December up to celebrating the birth of Christ at Christmas. Today is December the 14th, and so we will read from Luke chapter 14. And Luke writes, On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. Just then in front of him there was a man who had dropsy. And Jesus asked the lawyers and Pharisees, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not?" But they were silent. Jesus took him and healed him, and sent him away. Then he said to them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, will you not immediately pull it out on a Sabbath day?" And they could not reply to this. When Jesus noticed how the guests chose the place of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace you would have to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." One of the dinner guests, on hearing this, said to him, "Blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." Then Jesus said to him, "Someone gave a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent his slave to say to people who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready now.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a piece of land, and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to try them out. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I have just been married, and therefore I cannot come.' So the slave returned and reported this to the master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, 'Go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And the slave said, 'Sir, what you ordered has been done, and there is still room.' Then the master said to the slave, 'Go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in, so that my house will be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited will taste my dinner.' Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, 'Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how can saltiness be restored? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. They throw it away. Let anyone with ears to hear listen." This is the word of God for us and for many, the people of God. Thanks be to God. We turn again to our youth who are helping to guide us, who are led by Nathan today. And he's really drawn to this opening section. one of the things that happens when we have these big readings and we get to the point where I talk about it a little bit, our brains often are so much stuck on what we just heard. It's that recency bias type of thing. And so we hear about, you know, the cost of discipleship. We hear about salt. We hear about this, and you kind of, that's where your brain goes. And that often means that the first stuff doesn't really get talked about. And Nathan's not going to let us do that. And what I think is so important, and you heard me talk about it a little yesterday, looking ahead, is there was a lot of talk about Sabbath in Luke 13, but here in Luke 14, we still started. Just a reminder, as an aside, the chapters, when Luke sat down and wrote this, it did not have chapter and verses. That was put later. Sometimes I worry we get stuck on the chapter and verse, and so we assume that 14:1 must have nothing to do with 13:35. That's just not the case. And he's really focused both on his thoughts and his questions were like, why didn't the Pharisees not want to help others? Were the Pharisees, did they want him to not heal? And, who are the Pharisees really? I mean, one, from a very simple question, the Pharisees are kind of the forerunners to rabbis, today's rabbis. The Pharisees ran local synagogues. They helped teach people. They helped train people. As I mentioned in one of our earlier videos, the way that it often happened is that men, boys really, in Israel, they would often start to receive teaching from your local Pharisee. And along the way, eventually there would be cut lists, and we would see who are the ones, and obviously the ones who made it all the way through could become Pharisees themselves. We've become, in our Christian world, so influenced by the way we often talk about Pharisees that we assume Pharisee must be bad. And that's not really it. The Pharisees are devout people. They are devout Jewish people. They are devout children of Abraham. That is 100% what they are. They are trying to teach the people how they live in a world in which their faith and their identity is not necessarily the way the world operates, or in a world where new opportunities, new challenges are presented that maybe aren't clear-cut answers. It's why you have the rabbis today, and you have the various teachings, and not just the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, which we would call the Old Testament, but also the Midrashes and the Mishnahs, to all these other ways to speak about it. And just like today, we have different strains of Judaism and what their rules are, what they believe it means to be Jewish. That's what you have here. And so there's a big question. We talked about the Sabbath yesterday, right? This day of rest. Well, on a legalistic standpoint, what is allowed to be done? How is it that we habituate ourselves, and specifically for them, their societies, so that they are following the rules? They are following their identity, really. This is what it means to be a Jew, and that's what they're trying to figure out. And yes, what do you do on the Sabbath, right? If you don't know, in Israel, it is very common, if not ubiquitous, that on the Sabbath, which is sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, the elevators, you don't push the button to go to them. You just know that the elevator is going to stop on every floor. It's just going to stop going all the way up, and then once it'll go all the way down, stopping at every one, because for certain Jews, pushing the button in the elevator is defined as work, which you are not supposed to do. And that's what we get here too, is this question of healing. Is that something that ought be done? And we don't get the exact answer at first, because Jesus even asks them, and they don't answer. Maybe because they themselves are trying to figure that out. It can be seen as a novel question in a lot of ways. Because when you talk about healing, specifically healing not through medicine, but through Jesus just healing things, what do you do with that? How do you determine what is good and what is not good? And that's what they do. And they clearly have an opinion that Jesus, at the very least, is being flippant, is not taking the time to consult with the people and to talk about, hey, y'all, can we sit down, can we figure this out? Jesus said the opinion of no, this person has a need, and so I'm going to meet that need. Um, and I think you would find a fair amount of Jewish people today, and even back then, who say, yeah, that's a good thing, because like they talk about, you would if your child or your ox had fallen into a well, you would help them up. There to save a life is something that you are permitted often to break mitzvah, which is Jewish law, to do. Um, so it's just more about a disagreement, and maybe there's talks of power, and certainly history is filled with people of faith who utilize their faith to negative ends, right? That people can do bad things with their faith. And maybe that is this, but I would encourage all of us, if you go into the season, especially, in this whole happy holidays type of stuff, of considering how perhaps we don't properly evaluate and judge our Jewish brothers and sisters, the ones who came before us. They are not grafted into ours. We are grafted into theirs, Paul says. So that's something I said early on. Remember, Jesus is Jewish. So let's take a look at that, and let's be more charitable and more see what we can do with that. So thank you, Nathan, for asking those questions. So just a reminder, today, this is coming at you in the morning. We will be at Joy Chapel at noon for Wreaths Across America, and then at Galilee Cemetery after that. So come on out. Otherwise, I hope to see all y'all tomorrow. Remember, if you can, bring your Angel Tree Tag gifts as well. I'll see you all for Advent 3. Bye now.